Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Seforim Chatter podcast, and actually another joint edition of the Seforim Chatter and Jewish History Soundbites podcast with Yehuda Geberer and Dovi Safier. We did this once before and live from Prague, and now, kind of as a follow-up from that episode, we'll be discussing something that came out of that, a little bit of crowdfunding and Rav Yonah Minsker and Yonas Eilem and some other stuff. So thank you, Yehuda, and I'll turn it over to you if you want to do an intro, and to Dovi.
Great to be with you again, Nachi. Jewish History Soundbites and Seforim Chatter get along great. And the glue that holds us together is Dovi Safier. So we can't do it without Dovi. So all three of us are together. And it's apropos because we have this article that we've published in the Mishpacha Magazine this week that all three of us did together, and it has a lot to do with our previous podcast. So maybe we'll dive right into that.
Sounds good. And I love that you guys have me on. The way I work is I don't have my own podcast. I just hijack other people's podcasts, and I think it's a great system. I don't really do any work, just talk a little bit, and to push anything, I just come on to other podcasts. I think that straight out of the David Bashevkin playbook, before he started his own.
So let's start off. I'll facilitate here a little bit in the beginning. Let's start off. Let's talk about, so how did we get into this? And why is Mishpacha Magazine running a piece this week? This is Parshas Lech Lecha, October, what are we recording this today, the 26th of 2023. Why are they doing Rav Yonah Minsker now, Rav Yonah Karpilov, Minsker, and Yonas Eilem? How did we get there? I don't know, Yehuda, you want to talk about the bio, or Dovi, you want to talk about the crowdfunding? But how did we get here that we did this joint article between the three of us?
The idea, Dovi and I are always doing Mir stuff, Mir history, always cover different angles of it, different aspects of it. And Rav Yonah Minsker is an important piece of that history as one of the major people of the Mir, and one of the ones who didn't make it, who was unfortunately left behind and killed by the Nazis. He didn't get the visa to get to Shanghai. So he's been on our radar for a while. Specifically, Dovi had been involved in the republication of the Sefer Yonas Eilem, which is the Torah of Rav Yonah Minsker, which we'll talk about soon, obviously. The Sefer is what instigated this whole thing. And the publication of the Sefer, republication of a Sefer brings to mind who was the author, what's his story, does the world know about it? And we started to get into it. So I had wanted to do an episode on him at some point anyway, and Dovi was already involved in the republication of the Yonas Eilem this past summer. I think it was right before Tisha B'Av or so. It was apropos for Tisha B'Av. Rav Yonah Minsker was killed by the Nazis, so it's sad and tragic. So it fits into the Tisha B'Av atmosphere. So we did this episode both in mentioning the republishing and the story of the mirrors who didn't make it, not specifically Rav Yonah Eilem, the Yonas Eilem, Rav Yonah Minsker, but all of them, and that was the history side. I think the Sefer was when it was we heard about it. I mean, I know for sure now in the Sefer, but even then, when we were told about it, we were told that it's going to have a biography of his in the introduction to the Sefer. So that was very exciting that they're including the historical component in it as well. And that's why I wanted to be involved. And republishing of a Sefer, any Sefer, is already Nachi's domain. So the history and the Seforim once again meet.
Exactly. And I want to say, that's good, your point again, Yonas Eilem, it's not Yonas Eilem like everyone in Yeshiva seems to think. But I was just telling someone that goes along with the Biruch HaMoshen's Yereach Lamayadim. Yerach Lamayadim. Sorry, it's Yereach. Everyone thinks it's Yerach. But whatever. Mispronounced Seforim. That's a whole nother podcast episode we could do. So let's talk about him. Dovi, I don't know if you want to start, Yehuda. Talk about Rav Yonah Karpilov, Rav Yonah Minsker, who tragically was killed at 32 years old by the Nazis. And we have this small selection of his Torah that's a real classic in the yeshiva world. That's all that we have from him, and unfortunately, he was tragically killed very young. Never got married, no kids.
It's the story is really a microcosm of a lot of what was going on in Vilna, in 1940, when this Sugihara visa, right, and the Japan to fictional Curacao landing, right, which was never going to happen anyways. And so much has been spoken about it. And the decision of the Mir Yeshiva, and really decision led by one of the students in the Mir Yeshiva, one of the lions of the Yeshiva, Rav Malin, who we profiled at length. And that profile during the research process, I learned a lot about Rav Yonah Minsker. But what I discovered after the article on Rav Malin was published is that Rav Yonah Minsker is one of the subjects of in the yeshivish conspiracy theory world, and the amount of theories that people have about why he didn't travel with the Mir is just like the emails are still coming. Meaning, even before this article, I'm sure will inspire many more creative ideas as to why Rav Yonah Minsker didn't escape, which you laid out so great, so perfectly in the article. But people just I don't know where these ideas come from, and not only are these theories, but people are 100% confident they heard it from their grandfather who was a Mir allegedly, and things like that, and a lot of them just don't quite make sense. So getting down to the bottom of it, right? This is a subject Yehuda knows as well as anyone, and he's in the middle of a podcast series on the topic. So I think he studied this, as much as anybody really, including some of the scholars who have written about it. Although I will say, and maybe who disagrees, there has never been a proper scholarly book or a good film or anything about the Nes Hatzalah, about the escape of the Mir Yeshiva, and it's really one of the greatest stories of the Holocaust, and one of the really good stories that we have to tell over. I'll never forget that I traveled together with Yehuda. It was actually the first trip that I went on with Yehuda, and maybe Yehuda will say it was the first major tour, right, that he conducted. It was a group of alumni of the Mir, people who were involved with the yeshiva at the moment. And I remember being in Sugi Hara house, and we're there, and one of the guys in the trip, Adam Merzov, pulls out his guitar, and he starts playing the song of Shir El Hashem, the Shir El Hashem, Ki Gamal Eloi. And then you look around the room and you see everyone, and you see one of the Rosh Yeshiva who was with us just bawling, and you realize that the weight that the Mir Yeshiva has on its shoulders is really the only yeshiva that survived. 99% or 98% of them survived and made it out, and it really was the only one. And the way they survived was, quite frankly, with chutzpah. I'll let Yehuda go into it a bit more, but it's really a story. Yeah, you all have heard the story, but the details of the story really have to be fleshed out, like in a 9,000 page book or something.
I think I agree with you that there's never been a proper book written about it. There's been a lot of books and articles written around it, written close to it, but never a start to finish book, and it's waiting to be written. And we're trying to do our part with the article we wrote on Rav Malin a couple of years ago, with this article that the three of us put together now about Rav Yonah Minsker, about someone who did not make it, who didn't get a visa, with the episode I did this past summer in honor of the republication of the Sefer about the Mirs who didn't make it. And now, Jewish History Soundbites is running this multi-part, it's ongoing series of the Great Shanghai Escape, which describes it from A to Z and going through the whole thing, the whole story from start to finish. So if you want to, learn more about the story, recommend you that you, besides for listening to Seforim Chatter, you should also listen to this series on Jewish History Soundbites. But I think that what Dovi is saying is about how so much of the story is misunderstood, and perhaps this article that we're writing clarifies some of these points, because here we're highlighting, what in theory, was more likely to have happened to the entire yeshiva. Really, everyone should have remained behind, just like everyone else, just the rest of the 6 million, like Rav Yonah Minsker, and ended up being killed. And we would have talked about the Mir was this yeshiva before the war, and everyone died al Kiddush Hashem, and isn't that tragic? That's really how historians would have been talking about the Mir today. And instead, we're saying, hey, we have to sit here and explain, like Dovi said, all these conspiracy theories about why Rav Yonah Minsker didn't make it, because everyone assumes, oh, of course, everyone in the mirror made it. Everyone in the mirror is out, and we almost take this miracle and this incredible escape for granted, so much so that we have to start explaining why Rav Yonah Minsker didn't make it. And you did mention some of the more creative theories that we have. You should read the article that the three of us had. It's in this week's Mishpacha Magazine, and I also discussed it a little bit on the podcast last summer. But some of them were just, downright funny. One of them was that his mother had contacted him and she wanted him home, which was like a strange theory because he had left his home before his bar mitzvah and hadn't seen or heard from his mother presumably in 20 years. Now, all of a sudden, he's together in the Soviet Union with his mother because Lithuania had been incorporated into the Soviet Union. And all of a sudden, his mother wants him home, like he's 32 years old, and now he can't go with the yeshiva. It just sounds a bit preposterous. And other ones about his shidduch or things like that. Oh, we heard another one that was allegedly in the name of Reb David Kronglas. I mean, Reb David Kronglas, if he would tell me the story, I would obviously believe him. But one of the great Altamirs, the Mashgiach of Ner Yisrael. We just have to figure out exactly what went wrong in the details because there's something that doesn't add up. Something about that he had all the papers, all the documentation, all the visas, all the exit visas, the transit visas, the end visas, and his passport. He had everything in order. The only thing that he also had a train ticket. And allegedly, this version of the story says he was basically just about to get on the train with all of his documentation that he got, just like everyone else. And Reb David Kronglas needed the train ticket, so he gave him the train ticket and said, "Hey, you know what? I'll take the next train." And turned out it was the last train, and he couldn't make it out. And that also it strains the belief, to state that he had all the documentation in order when all the evidence suggests otherwise, and just somehow there was no other train. I mean, there was plenty of other trains. These trains ran all the time. This is months before Barbarossa. So it's just like what Dovi was saying, that we need to clear the air a little bit and try to understand the context a little bit and how it made sense that not only Rav Yonah Minsker, but some other mirrors also didn't make it out. Not everyone got the miracle visas. Some were killed by the Nazis. And maybe that can help us even appreciate the miracle more about the ones who did get out, the ones who were able to somehow get saved, the majority of the yeshiva.
I think it's really it took a bit of searching, and Mrs. Shalamis Berger, who runs the Yeshiva University archives, I once spent a few hours there. Yossel Hausman, who our good friend, was with me. And we were looking through some of the papers in the Vadat Tzala collection there, and we found requests from urgent requests to those who had made it to Japan to send tickets for Rav Yonah Minsker. Now, another one of the stories that's told is that a Polish to receive a passport, mind you, he was a Russian citizen, not a Polish citizen, costed like 9 kopecks or something, or rubles, and he was only willing to pay up to 7. So he wasn't able to get one. But then you see that he's trying to get a visa. So he obviously had some kind of a passport. And then in Yehuda and I, this is one of our first archival visits, right? When we went to Yad Vashem that time. If anybody knows where the rest of Dr. Kranzler's papers are, by the way, please let us know, because we've looked everywhere. But some of what in Zerach or Haftig, who really is the one of the main characters in the whole story, in his archive, there's you see desperate telegrams, please try and save Karpilov, Yonah Karpilov. So you really can see that the sources here are endless, really, and have when I'm ready to do more research into this, I am sure that we can uncover the exact reason as to why he didn't go. But I think that we have it pretty solid in the articles. I don't think we need to really rehash all of the details here.
So I want to say that, first of all, yes, read the article, and we'll talk about it more, but I'll include a link in the show's notes. I assume Yehuda Yola as well, and I'll include a link to Yehuda's series that he's doing now on the mirrors and Shanghai, and the rest.
Is it Shanghai or Shanghai? I don't know where Shanghai is.
Shanghai. Okay. Anyways, regardless, let's talk a little bit about Rav Yonah. We mentioned him as Karpilov Minsker. We'll talk about his brother being named Wolensky, his name. And you mentioned also that he's a Russian. He was from Russia. He's a Russian citizen. And that also has to do with one of the more solid theories that's put forth in the article for why he didn't leave. So let's talk about his background, where he's from, where he's born, his name. I don't know which one you want to do that, but we should tell the listeners a little about him, those that aren't super familiar with him.
So they should read the article. All the details are there. But this week's Mishpacha Magazine. He grew up in Minsk. That's why he got the appellation Minsker, which is quite common in those days. His name was Karpilov. His father was Rabbi Cheskel Karpilov. His brother ended up being named Volensky, and that had to do with him immigrating to Palestine, which was also common, depending on how you got the immigration certificate and how you got out. You very often had to change your name. Name changes were very common at that time anyway, because of drafts and all kinds of stuff. So we shouldn't be too concerned about how his name changed. He grows up during World War I, when Minsk is a center of refugees, and he ends up learning in a yeshiva of Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, which was a branch of Radin, in exile during World War I. He then ends up going to learn by Baruch Ber Leibovich when he was in Vilna before he moved to Kamenetz. I sometimes tell groups on trips, I say we call it the Kamenetz Yeshiva. So for most of its history, it was in Slobodka. It was a breakaway from the Alter's Yeshiva. For a bunch of years, it was in exile in Kremenchug in Ukraine. It also spent a bunch of years in Vilna until 1926. And then for the last 13 years of its existence, it was in Kamenetz. But it's the Kamenetz Yeshiva. That's how it's known. So he learns there before it's in Kamenetz. So he's a Talmud of Baruch Ber, and then ends up in the Mir. And he becomes one of the main people there, very close with the Biruchim, and superstar, something like unique, the way people described him. He was something special. He wasn't just another guy in the yeshiva. He was part of the elite and was very, very well respected. Was a Talmud of the Brisker Rav as well while he was in the Mir, which was also common for Bachram in the Mir at that time. And he gains renown. He gains renown as one of the great superstars of the entire Litvische yeshiva world.
And really the rest of the story is in the article, so read the article. I don't want to rehash, I just wanted to go over in brief over here. And so after the war, we'll just skip ahead to the Sefer a little bit for now. After the war, the Sefer is published. Later on, his brother publishes it. As we mentioned, his brother Wolensky, his brother gets out. His brother publishes the Sefer, puts together the Torah. And there's I think, 2 more editions done. They add some material. There's some Hespedim said on him, some Torah from his Rebbeim, from his friends. And then eventually, but the thing about the Sefer is, for those that are familiar with the Sefer, most Yeshivalite are, it was this old font. It's been in and out of print for years. It's available, it's not available. I remember as Yeshiva, it came back available in a red cover, it used to be a black cover, and everyone ran to buy it, and then it went back out of print. There was no index at all, and it's on random topics that he learned, that he spoke about. It's not like a specific on a certain Masechta or even on Rambam. It's just like, topics that they had, Shikach Torah from him that they put together. So it's hard to use. And so with that, Dovi, maybe you want to take over here. We're talking about the crowdfunding, where we spoke about on the podcast that we did in Prague about the Mishal Migra, which, by the way, hasn't happened yet, but maybe Mr. will, and how his Seforim fell into disrepair and should be redone. And, Dovi mentioned at that point, we crowdfunding, and maybe that would be something we can go about. There's all these raising campaigns, charity campaigns, whatever platform, and everyone's raising everything.
It's funny, actually, because I was actually on a Zoom earlier today with some of the people from charity who graciously offered to conduct this campaign free of charge when they heard about it. And I just thought that crowdfunding could be a great platform. It's being used for everything else today. Kickstarter was like the first thing. Then I moved GoFundMe, and then the Frum world adopted it, it's become part of our religion, crowdfunding, and hundreds of millions of dollars are raised annually that way. And I figured, why not try it for Seforim? And I had an opportunity this summer to be in Deal, New Jersey, once again as part of something for the Mir. And I met a wonderful young rabbi whose name was Rabbi David Haber, and his nephew, whose name is Pinchas or Phil Shelby, had been working on this Sefer. And he said, you're a Mir guy, you're into this. He knew I was into history. He's into history. He says, do you know anybody who'd be interested in sponsoring the Sefer? And a light went off in my head, and I said, you know what? We talked about the crowdfunding thing. We never really got the Shalom Igor thing started. It was a large project. It was, there was a lot involved in that. This seems pretty easy. Let's test it. And when I say test it, I didn't think that we would post a page and less than 3 days later, we got $25,000 raised from more than 100 donors. And I think we probably, if we would have had to have raised double, maybe we probably could have raised it too. And people were so responsive to the idea. People were so gracious about it. Nobody asked, for really anything in exchange. And it shows that this is something I think that is, definitely we can bring. Don't worry, we're not going to have like on our statuses every single day another crowdfunding campaign for a Sefer. But I think this is something that could be done more often, and suggestions are coming forth, and I think that we're pretty close to getting another one started in the near future. So stay tuned on that. I wanted to just bring up. I think that I think this story we can move on to something else here. But once we were on this topic, first of all, today's Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel, the Mira Shiva's yard site, and it brought to mind a person who's very close to Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel, Yechiel Ben Zion Fishoff, Benny, best known as Benny Fishoff, and I had the opportunity to get a sneak preview into something that's pretty rare in the Frum world, in the art scroll world, which is a memoir. I can't think of too many memoirs that were written by non-maskilim, and I think that I just want to get into two of them quickly. And first is this one that's coming out next week that's called Bi'ahava, with love, which is really a Benny Fishoff's story. Benny Fishoff was a boy from Lodz, a Geberer Chassid, who just latched on to Yeshivas Chachmei Lublin. And traveled with them to Shanghai, and was very close to the Amshinover Rebbe, who was really, I guess, almost like the Rosh Yeshiva of the Chabad and Chachmei Lublin group. He was definitely a spiritual leader, the rabbi, and he became a businessman while in Shanghai. And this is a story that you don't usually hear told. You hear about the guys in the mirror and Tamimim but you don't really hear about this other thing, which is a young boy who comes there, and he had a working pass. He was able to get in and out of the ghetto as he wanted, and in the book he points out that because of that pass, kept him out of the ghetto, and he says maybe later on in life he has regrets. He says maybe if I hadn't had that pass, I would have been sitting and learning, and I would have gained more Torah knowledge. But ultimately he becomes a leader. And after he comes to America, he becomes a leader in Agudas Yisrael in America, a very influential philanthropist, somebody who accomplished a lot of great things and was just a wonderful person. And our Mishpacha colleague, Shirley Besser, spent many hours and hours sitting with him and recording his memories for him, and adds footnotes and a little bit of detail here and there, adds some color. But overall, it's one of I love memoirs, probably my favorite genre of books, and it's got to be up there with one of the more fascinating ones I've ever read. I think it's coming out next week. I think it's available for pre-order on the Art School website, and it's absolutely fascinating. I really, really enjoyed reading it.
Footnotes
and directly related to our topic of both Seforim books and Shanghai and all that, so it fits right in.
And there's footnotes in our art school book. Look at that. So, Dovi, what was the other memoir that you wanted to talk about?
So I think it's something. What did you say?
You wanted to mention the Sheikhet one?
Yes. This is a book from Academic Studies Press, which is also extremely rare. It's one of the, also, like it says, the introduction really harps on this point, that it's really, one of the only, definitely one of maybe the first couple of Hasidic memoirs ever written. It was written in Yiddish in the early 20th century, but it really goes back to when the author, who was a sheikhet in Crimea, I'm in the middle of the book, and it's full of color. And what's fascinating about it is, and I think this was pointed out as well in the translator's introduction, is that this is a fellow who really writes about his experiences. And he's not a worldly person. He doesn't write about current events, doesn't write about what's going on in the world, and he's clearly writing it as he goes along. It's not like somebody who sat at the end of their life and penned memories of what happened or did not happen 70 years earlier, which often the problem with these books. He definitely was writing it throughout his life, and what inspired him to write at a time when nobody, this was unheard of in that world. And honestly, it's flowery. It's written really nicely. Unfortunately, it's full of tragedy and but you meet, Sey Chemed. He meets several Hasidic rebbes that he writes about. But it's a fascinating book, and it's one of a kind. And also, I have to point out, sometimes we discuss academic books, and then people they want to purchase them, and they go online, and it's like $160. You could get paid out over the course of 2 years or something. But Academic Studies Press has done something great, which I see some of the Indiana University Press is doing, and Nachi probably knows which ones do this, which ones don't. But they offer a paperback option for $25, which is by book standards. Obviously, it's nice. It's a good price. They also go on sale from time to time, but it's really a book that's it's pure, it's colorful, and it's something that it's like Shalom Aleichem on steroids, like writing a memoir. It's really you just really get a real glimpse into what life was like at that time in a place, Crimea, in that region, really, where you have to realize at some point they were under Muslim control. I mean, it's really something I really did not know much about, and it's a totally different take on the shtetl life, with all the usual stuff as well, in a very real way.
Yeah, so I'll also mention it was put out together with Touro University Press. Touro publishes through Academic Studies Press, and like you were saying, it is available in a hardcover, but they also did a paperback, which is $25. I'll put the link in the show's notes via Amazon. You can order it. I don't know, Yehuda, if you do such a thing, but I'll do it, and anyone interested can check it out. I got a copy as well. There's like a long introduction. Hoping to do a podcast with the translator editor, but that's for when I get a chance to read it. And Dovi, just in general, memoirs are really fascinating, I'll tease here. Yehuda mentioned his series, so I'll plug myself a little here. Also, I'm doing I have some I've done on the Magal Tov Yehuda, but going, and I have an episode forthcoming on Sefer Yonas Vital's sometimes controversial autobiography kind of story diary. That's also a memoir, as well as I'll be doing David Raveni, which came out in English translation, which is fascinating, in the forthcoming series I'm doing on the Asar Shvatim. And then I'm actually working on now a series, I may as well say, on memoir type thing on Jewish travelers and travelogues throughout the centuries, which there's tons of these. I mean, you go back to Binyamin of Tudela and Psachia of Regensburg, brother of Baltoisis, and you talk about Rav Bartanura, the Rav goes to Eretz Yisrael and writes letters, and you have the Chida, obviously, and you have many others. I mean, countless others that write these kind of, but there's not tons of them, and they're really kind of colorful and fascinating and really interesting to see, like, what life was like and what they perceived things like, not just reading a biography or someone writing about what they saw. You're seeing actually what they envisioned and especially a lot of the travelers, you see them going from place to place. But a lot of these are really interesting. So, David, I didn't see the one from art school though. It sounds very interesting. I didn't see it's coming out.
It's coming out in a week, but I think they just posted it for pre-order on the website. So I figured it was worth mentioning. I really, really enjoyed it. But Yehuda knows me and the memoirs. But memoirs are a place to get information, but you obviously have to be careful sometimes when using them as sources, because we all know. I mean, I hardly remember what happened yesterday, let alone many, many years ago. Sometimes memoirs tend to be difficult, when trying to decipher things and to learn about stories, because you'll see two memoirs that repeat the same story in totally different fashions.
Dovi, can you mention, I got a copy of the book after you told me about it, but I haven't had a chance to read it yet, the Moshe der Zinger that Koren published. It's also a memoir.
Wow. That book, it was a bit eerie, actually. I read the book on a Friday night, and I decided that after reading this book, which was really, you called me off guard here, so I don't even remember the name of the author. Maybe
Moshe Krauss, is that his name?
Moshe Krauss, who was a chazan who, as a child, already traveled across Europe, was a prodigy, and really spent his life as a chazan. He writes about his travails during the Holocaust, but really his whole life story, and does not leave out any details. The hardships he suffered, and I after Shabbos, I Googled his name, and I said, I got to write an article about this person. He is fascinating. And I saw he had passed away 3 days earlier. He lived past 100, I think. But that's also one of those memoirs which I think is like must read if you enjoy that genre.
Yehuda, what about you? Any books, any memoirs, anything, thing you read recently, or anything you want to talk about?
Um, the the uh, the- no.
I'm putting you on the spot. I'm putting you on the spot over here. Come
I
up with.
have not read any memoirs recently. Period. It's not like I've read any that are more or less interesting. But memoirs, like Dovi said, are an invaluable resource on one hand, and on the other hand, you have to take these things with a grain of salt or a few grains of salt to be careful what the memoirist is saying.
Yeah, listen, I don't read novels. The last novel I read was a John Grisham book, I think as like a 11 or 12-year-old, and I stopped reading novels, which is really what got me into history in the first place. But I think that, for those of us who don't read novels, reading memoirs is a bit of a filler, for that kind of stuff. Definitely a lot of the memoirs you read are sometimes have a lot of that novel type material. But Yehuda tends to read, more textbook type of stuff that he enjoys. So, we're all different. And yeah, memoirs are pleasure reads. They're not necessarily a place, to fill yourself with information on a subject, but definitely good, good to fill in some blanks here and there. And just going into a used bookstore, especially the Jewish used bookstores that have cropped up, the Capital Seforim, that chain, right? You can find real gems. Sometimes the unpublished memoirs that someone puts out end up there, and you find stuff there that you never imagine. And I have a large collection of these type of books. Once in a while, I'll post on Twitter a recommendation. I used to do it more often. I don't anymore. I kind of lost track in the mess of books in my house of what I read and what I don't read. But definitely love the memoirs.
I just got to a used bookstore. I got from Israel Mizrahi, our friend. It was published by some weird press in Israel. Mineged, he told me it's like an outfit of it's associated with Kedem, the auction house, and they printed about a year or two ago. I don't think it's sold. I don't think it's even sold anywhere. It's like beautiful edition of a written in Old Yiddish, a travelogue by somebody in 1721 or 23. And he was a bacher, and he travels around. He goes through Italy, and he goes through Europe, and he writes down. It's all his. I think he writes it later, but it's like his recollection of what the community is like and what his travels were like, and really cool. So they did some real color pictures in there, and there's some really fancy illustrations in it. So talk about something interesting. That's like a memoir when you're talking about memoirs that are interesting.
Yeah, I think also with everything going on in the world today, and we mentioned Yehuda's research, I think it's important. Yehuda mentioned to me, and I think he shared this with his listeners, that somebody who he has followed and gone to their lectures and really utilized his research is one of the hostages being held by Hamas at the moment. Maybe Yehuda could just talk about him for a minute and share his name. And
yeah, so it's. I mean, we're going through an interesting time as the Jewish people as a whole, and in Israel in particular, where I am. This guy Alex Danzig, he is an older man in his mid-70s, his Holocaust historian and researcher. I got to know him in Yad Vashem, went to several of his lectures, and he lives in kibbutz near Oz, which is one of those kibbutzim that the massacre and many hostages were taken. So he's presumed, it's understood that he's one of the hostages there, and very sad and tragic. And what I found to be even more sad and tragic, obviously there can't be anything more sad and tragic than a 75-year-old man being taken hostage for no reason other than the fact that he's a Jew. But I found to be, I guess, more ironic about it was that the focus of his research throughout his career in Yad Vashem, and I've heard from him on the topic a few times, is Polish-Jewish relations. So the idea was that he was researching the neighborly relations, both the good and the bad, the positive and the negative, over the centuries throughout Polish-Jewish history. And here he's kidnapped by, it's different than neighbors in Poland. It's neighbors across the border in Gaza. It's not exactly in your but it's nearby. And the horror of that taking place just caught me by that in the context of his research. I liked it that like you mentioned, we mentioned before about academia and memoirs, and there's we sometimes yearn for the simplicity. He would always emphasize to us in his lectures, I'm just a kibbutznik. I'm not an academic. I'm just a simple kibbutznik. He used to say that a lot. So we hope the simple kibbutznik gets back home safely, along with all the other hostages, and we can end this terrible, challenging time that we're in right now.
Amen.
Yeah, I think that people love to talk about unparalleled times for the Jewish people, and during our lifetimes, Baruch Hashem, we haven't had to see too many of those, but this is certainly among them, and this is something that the state of Israel has never seen. I also, first days of Sukkot, and right before that, I was reading also another new book, which definitely I could recommend, and perhaps Yehuda Nachi, you guys should read it too, called 18 Days in October, which is a new book in the Yom Kippur War that a landsman of mine from Lawrence, Uri Kaufman, who's a real estate professional, spent 20 years researching, and really, really does amazing research, and reveals several really new facts about the Yom Kippur War, and the parallels you see in certain places over there, right? And after reading the book, I said, wow, I never realized, how bad it was and the situation Israel was. Even though I read some of the other books in Yom Kippur War, but how scary it was. And then for something like this to happen right after that, as someone who really looks to history often, as a way to put things into context, it really, this is really, I guess, truly unparalleled.
Yeah. Unless you go back to the Holocaust. Holocaust educators were always busy saying, this is not like the Holocaust. You have to be very careful when using Holocaust imagery and comparisons. And all of a sudden, we're turning around and saying, hey, this is like the Holocaust. So it's pretty scary that we're confronting a reality in the 21st century that we're saying, wow, this is just like the Holocaust. I also have been starting to think, and it's also related to what we've been talking about, Rav Yonah Minsker and people getting killed in the Holocaust and things like that, because he was killed in the Slobodka pogrom. So we as Jewish Holocaust educators, from community, the Yad Vashem community, the Israeli community, have very much been focused on the victim narrative, because we want to focus on the Jewish story, on the victim narrative, and what's their perspective, and how did they feel, and how did they go through it and experience it. And the last few weeks, I've been doing some soul searching, and I've been thinking maybe we've been negligent. Maybe we've been neglecting the story of the perpetrators. Maybe we haven't understood properly and educated and told the story of the perpetrators enough. And perhaps that's apropos that we should start, as Holocaust educators, we should start talking about the role of perpetrators and not be completely focused on the victims in light of, what we saw the last few weeks.
Well, could you flesh that out a drop more?
The idea that we ask, how is this humanly possible? How can people do such a things? How can they go ahead and perpetrate such a mass murder, such a massacre, such sadism and cruelty? How could human beings do such a thing? And there's a ton of research that has gone into explaining these phenomena. And it's not only Nazi racial ideology, that's one component. It's not only anti-Semitism, that's another component. It's not only some regular human traits like social conformity and not wanting to be different and being part of a crowd and getting swept up with these type of things. It's a combination of factors, and there's books have been written about it, and psychologists have what to say about it, the famous Milgram and Phillips and Bardo prison experiment and the wave and all kinds of things like that. But it's also historians have things to say about it. Christopher Browning has written, the book Ordinary Men, which many have responded to, and many have written other works about it to explain who the perpetrators were and why they did what they did. And I think that if, in light of what we saw, meaning we were kind of like horrified, how is it possible for human beings to do it? And you even see on social media, they're not human, they're monsters, they're animals, only animals would do such a thing. Well, the truth is it's human beings who did it. And we have to understand in order to be able to prevent this, we don't have to only understand the story of the victims. We also have to understand how people are capable of becoming perpetrators, so we can better be prepared for ideologies and for human behaviors to make sure in a preventative sense to make sure that things like this don't happen.
Yeah, I also think it's not fair to animals to compare these people to animals because animals are didn't do anything to be compared to these kind of whatever you call them. But
Sadist.
listen, I try and avoid any politics and stuff, and I certainly try and avoid the way the Western media, for the most part, portrays these people, which definitely they can spend some time soul searching and doing some research and trying to understand the overall story in the Middle East, and Israel, and Israel specifically, because you see the lack of knowledge in general that they have. Read a couple of books about the conflict and the long history and Hebron massacre and how things like this happened pre-state, and you can go back to the beginning. But I'll leave that to the political talking heads.
Yeah, that politics, like you're saying, we heard or we saw the WhatsApp audio of the Hamas guy, calling his father in Gaza, cheering that he killed. He didn't, Rahman al. I mean, it's just it's horrible when you see and you hear all the things that happen there, as well as, I mean, everything that's been going on. And listen, I'm thankful that I'm not in law school anymore to see what's been going on in the American universities and the anti-Semitism that's been occurring. And like you say, Dovi, just the lack of understanding or knowledge for anything that you really see throughout, the United States a lot.
You should be thankful you're not in law school even without this.
Right. I've been
for sure.
Yeah, I've been telling people this is why I didn't go to Harvard or Cooper Union or Stanford. It's just because of events like this. But honestly, I have spent time on Stanford's campus and on Harvard's campus, and the libraries are supposed to be places of refuge for your mind. It shouldn't be a place where Jews have to go to hide. And in general, what's happening on university campuses, not so different than what happened, right, in the late 30s.
A lot of parallels, unfortunately.
Yeah, and scary places. And I do wonder, if certain Jewish, Orthodox high schools will stop printing ads bragging that their graduates are going to Harvard and Yale and Stanford and places like this, because maybe we should stop using that as a barometer for success. And I understand the need for higher education. I'm not one to definitely, but we have wonderful places like Turo and Yeshiva University, and perhaps those places, all the Jewish money now that's being pulled from these Ivy League schools, perhaps that could go to further enhance those institutions as well as our yeshivas, day schools, and provide an even better education to our kids. But that's just my opinion, and I guess I'm entitled to that. But listen, it's scary times out there for everyone, and we're davening, that obviously all of those who are in harm's way stay safe, and all those who are in captivity are brought home safe and very, very quickly, because this is just hard to deal with as a Jew.
Amen. And all this has parallels, unfortunately, to the Rav Yonah Minsker story, which is why we decided to really do this podcast today, because of the article. So again, check out Mishpacha and read it, about Rav Yonah, about his his life. I was not going to say his unfortunate life, but the unfortunate tragic ending to his life. And you can read Yehuda's terrific biography of him, and woven together the story that we put together, but the three of us with Dovi's research, and I also did writing on the Sefer a little bit, and you can see a little bit, hear a little bit about the Sefer. And again, I didn't talk much about the Sefer, by the way. We didn't talk, because it's a Lamdish Sefer, again, on various topics. There's now an index. You can check it out. There's some other pieces they took from other places, but you'll read it up in the article. The Sefer is available in stores. Anyone interested? I've gotten people ask me. I posted it on the new Seforim Chatter WhatsApp community and on Twitter. Where can I get it? I can sales back in Brit. They redid it. Wow. So people are definitely excited about that, Dovi. So it's great that the crowdfunding worked out, Baruch Hashem, and hopefully listeners will stay tuned for more crowdfunding opportunities for Seforim. And like I said, I'll link to the article, Mishpacha article, but definitely everyone hearing this before this Shabbos should pick up the Mishpacha and read the article.
Thank you, Nachi. So this Jewish History Soundbite Seforim Shatter podcast with Dovi Safier worked out very nicely again. Maybe we'll do it again. If it's so enjoyable, we'll do it again in the future.
Yeah, we need feedback on that, and then we need a name, guys, if you want that. I don't know, maybe it should split off into its own podcast, or even if it's hosted on each of our podcasts respectively, it needs like a name with a caption that we're calling it. It's not live from anywhere this time. It's not like live from Prague,
I think 2 podcasters and a clown works well.
That's all right, I guess we'll hear what everyone has to say and what everyone thinks. But thank you, Yehuda. Thank you, Dovi. And
thank you, Nachi.